All right. Again, welcome everyone. This is our second in the series for our volunteer project leader training. Tonight we are featuring rockets as our topic, and we have Tony Foster. I'm going to let Tony talk a little bit about his experience and introduce himself.
Hi everyone, I'm Tony Foster, and yes, you've probably gotten seen my name on a bunch of different things before. So feel free to either say, yay, we get this guy, or curse me. Either way is fine. So a little bit about me. I've been involved in 4-H in some form or another for 31 years. Started out in 4-H as a 7-year-old 4-H'er and was enrolled in the Rocketry project for 12 years until I graduated high school, at which point I became a volunteer leader for different projects. About that time is when we added in robotics and several other areas into the STEM program that many people are familiar with. That's also about the time Rocketry was rebranded to Space Tech and is now rebranded to STEM. So we have a lot of stuff to cover. So I'm going to quickly go ahead and share my screen. And hopefully what you are seeing is my screen, and there we go, changing some settings on my end as well. So we're gonna basically have 3 activities this evening and have some Q&A at the end, because these activities tend to spawn a lot of discussion. So lots of good material to discuss there. We're going to start out talking about straw rockets. Some of you may have done these before, some of you might not have, along with some resources that go along with those. Then we're going to talk about figuring out how high did your rocket go. And you can use this with straw rockets. You can use this with estimating the height of, not estimating, that's a bad choice of words. Determining the height of trees, buildings, rockets, whatever you want to actually apply it to. Then we'll spend about 10 minutes talking about choosing your first rocket. And this is one that gets a lot of people all hung up and stuff, and it shouldn't. It's actually a really straightforward thing. So with that, I'm actually going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen here. And if you bring up your video screen, hopefully you are seeing a really funky deal. And I'm going to turn on my overhead camera here. So you should see my overhead camera, and I'm going to put myself over here in a little box on the side. So we're going to get started with straw rockets. The material here we'll actually use in just a second. So I'm going to slide that off the page there. And what we're going to do is literally build a straw rocket. And this is a fun activity to do, and it works well with all ages and stages, which is a great thing. So first thing we're going to need is a straw. And
as you guys are watching this, to help you guys so you can fully see it, if you go to the view button in the top right corner and hit speaker view, it'll make that larger. So you might be in gallery view, and to see this to the best of its capacity, hitting speaker view will help you.
Yep. So easiest way is you can go to a restaurant and just ask them, hey, can I get 10 or 15 straws from you? I want to do this activity with my youth. And typically they'll hand you a whole mess of straws and you'll be good to go. And for this, you'll need 1 big straw. So this black straw here that I just set on the paper is a big straw. And then you're going to need a little straw. And the bendy type of straws work best for the little straw. So we're going to need those. We're also going to need some mailing labels, and this is all we need for the activity. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to start by taking off a mailing label, just one, and we're going to give our rocket a nose cone. And all we do is wrap the label around the tip of the straw and then crimple or crunch it down so we have a little bit of a nose cone. You may want to give it a twist like so, and we have a nose cone. And so at this point in the activity, this is a great opportunity to talk about aerodynamics. It's also a great opportunity to talk about why do rockets need nose cones? And the simple answer on that is for this rocket, we need a nose cone so that we have pressure when we go to launch it. We also need it to be aerodynamic. So once we have a nose cone on our rocket, we're then going to give it some fins. And this takes 2 more mailing labels. So here's one label. And the easiest thing to do is set that down on the table and then put your rocket in the middle of it. So put the straw in the middle of it, and that's sticky side up. So note that it's not stuck to my black sheet of paper there. Then we're going to take another label and we're going to set it down on top of the first label. And you now have a rocket with fins. And with older Foragers, it's fun to talk about, can we make this different? Can we make this a 3-finned rocket? Which you can. It takes 3 labels instead of 2, and it takes a little bit more skill to get them there. And that gives us a straw rocket that we can launch. And at this point, you can talk about why fins are important to a rocket and how they keep the rocket going straight. You can also talk about taking your fins and giving them a twist. So here's one fin folded over, and I'm going to flip it over and I'll fold it this way. And so now if you look at my rocket and I'll flip it around here, you'll see that it has a twisty design. And what that's going to cause this rocket to do is spin when we launch it. And we can talk about gyroscopic spin and stabilization and how it makes our rocket more stable when you launch it. That said, to launch it, you're going to slide the straw in and you blow, and away it goes. When you're doing this with more than 2 youth, really more than 1 youth, I do recommend having safety glasses for everyone, because youth, and it doesn't matter the age, like to point these at everyone and launch them. So they'll sit there and send these things flying, and it does hurt if you get hit in the eye with one. Typically, it shouldn't do any damage, but it does hurt when you get hit. That said, the awesome Melissa, glad to hear that the ambassadors did a straw rocket with your clover buds. The instructions for this, and I'll paste the link in here, are on the STEM 4KS website. So let me paste that into the chat here real quick for everyone. So that is the simple instructions for straw rockets. You can go grab that, and it walks you through everything. So it's a great resource there. And then 2 other resources I'm going to put up for everyone in the chat are the 4 forces of flight and forces on a rocket. And the 4 forces of flight is a STEM set that New Mexico State University put out, and it has several great STEM activities that'll build on top of the straw rocket and allow you to take that further and talk about the 4 forces of flight. So thrust, lift, weight, and now I'm blanking on the 4th one. And then the second link, forces on a rocket, is material that NASA put out. And this material from NASA is a great addition to that as well, and specifically relates those 4 forces to rockets. So you can go and look at that. It does get a little more technical. So it works well with probably 9 years of age and up, especially when you get into high school students who'd like to know the formulas. They have a lot of the formulas in the material as well, but it doesn't rely exclusively on the formulas. So that is straw rockets. Let me know what questions you have about that. Melissa, I'd love to hear how the ambassadors doing straw rockets went with the clover buds.
They did it a little differently. They had like a little cutout of a rocket, but they did the 2 straws. They had the bendy straw and then the bigger straw taped to it so the kids could just blow the rocket off with the bendy straw, but they really enjoyed it.
Wonderful. All righty. Well, I'm going to set this aside. And the next thing we're going to talk about, since I haven't seen anyone pop up with questions or anything, is we're going to talk about how high did a rocket go? And this is finding out the altitude of a rocket. And for this, we're going to need a few different things. So we're going to need another straw. We're going to need some washers or some weights. It doesn't particularly matter what we're using there. We're going to need a protractor. We're going to need some string. And sorry for the camera shaking there. And this is all we really need to figure out how high a rocket went, or just about anything else for that matter. So the protractors, you can get bulk packs of these on just about any website you can think of, or it's also an awesome time right now to go to the stores and go through their clearance after school stuff, because most of them are clearing it out. And so you can pick up protractors for roughly 30 to 40 cents a piece. The straws, again, you can go to a convenience store or whatever and get those. Strings really easy to get. Washers should be really easy to get. Mailing labels is the other thing I used. So first thing we're going to do is obviously take our protractor out of its packaging, and then we're going to cut a length of string. And it doesn't need to be very long, as you can see, just long enough to hang down past the end of the protractor. So we're then going to feed this through the hole in the center of the protractor. I'm going to flip it over. And that feeds through, and we're going to tie a knot. And it doesn't have to be any sort of special knot or anything. Just regular crossover knot will be fine. And then I'm going to do another one on top of that to make sure that it's on there. And so there we have string attached to our protractor. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to attach our straw to the protractor. And the way I like to do this is with mailing labels. You can also do this with tape, so it doesn't matter how you choose to attach it. And what you're going to do is one end of a mailing label on the back side of the protractor, and you're going to then take a second label and put it on the back side of the protractor. Then you're going to take your straw, and normally I don't like using bendy straws for it, but I couldn't find the rest of my big straws, so we're just going to use the bendy straw here, and it'll work just fine. And we're going to attach this to the top of our protractor, like so. And now we have a sight. So we can look down the straw and sight our rocket. Then on the other end of the string here, we're going to take our washers, or whatever sort of weight we have on our, or to use as a weight. And again, we're just going to tie a couple of knots in it, just to make sure that they don't fall off while we're tracking our rocket. Now, I'm going to flip the shot around. To use this, I'm going to bring it up here, and you look down the straw and follow your rocket up. And you're going to keep following the rocket and following the rocket until it gets to its highest point, which is called apogee. And you're going to then lock your string down. Now, something important to realize with this is a lot of youth want to try and do it all. They want to try and launch their rocket and sight their rocket and everything all at the same time. And that's probably not feasible, and it's completely acceptable to have an adult, a junior leader, another sibling or something, follow the rocket up and sight it. They don't have to do it all. So for the Rocketry project, for Rocketry exhibits, they don't need to do that all. And that's something important that every year I have a few first year youth who get their rocket judged with me at a county fair who are like, well, I tried to do that and launch it and everything, and we got all these weird numbers and stuff. And so that number, and let's just say we got about 40 on here. And I'll flip the camera back over so that you can actually see how I have that set up. So let's say we got a 40 on the string. We can look that up in a table or do some math to figure out how high our rocket went. So I'm going to go ahead and turn on my main screen here and move this out of the way. So here is the simple altitude tracker, and I'll put the link for this in the chat here in just a second, that we built. Have all the instructions and everything. And then we have the scenario of how to figure out how high our rocket went. And in here, you'll notice that it talks about subtracting 90 degrees. And you may be thinking to yourself, and I know a lot of youth ask, why am I subtracting 90 degrees? Because you're doing a different angle here. So we want to change the angle so that it's measuring, instead of this angle here, it's actually measuring the angle from the ground to the rocket. So to do that, we have to subtract 90 degrees. So in this example, it uses 37 degrees for the angle that was measured. And the last part of this is how far back was the person from the rocket. In this example, they were 300 feet. So we can go through and do the math, which is essentially subtracting that 90 degrees, putting in that result into a tan function on a calculator. You don't have to go through what tangents are, especially with younger youth. And then we multiply it by the distance and we'll get our feet. So in this scenario, with the 37 degrees, we wound up going 226 feet in the air. Now, if we wanted to do this another way, there's a table in the instruction set where we can look up what our degrees shown was. So in this case, if I slide that over, I said 40 degrees, which is also 140 degrees. So we can look in the table and see that when we subtract 90 degrees, it's now 50 degrees and what its tangent value is and how far away were we from it. We can say we were 300 feet, so our rocket went 357 feet. And this is a completely acceptable way to calculate the height of your rocket. You might be asking, how high did your rocket go? Or how accurate is this? And the answer is, it's actually pretty accurate. We've compared these. I went out and did a launch with Riley County. We put an altimeter in a rocket and we used one of these Protractor altimeters, and we were within 3 feet of each other. So they're fairly accurate when you do the setup correctly. Now, one thing of note with these, and thank you, Melissa, that's the perfect setup for this. Is 300 feet the distance the person measuring the height has to be from the rocket? And the answer is no, it actually varies. So if you were to look at the table, and I'll post the link to the altitude finder here for everyone, you don't need to be 300 feet back. The answer actually is, how far do you think your rocket's going to go? Because if you're standing too close, you're not going to get an accurate measure. And if you're standing too far away, you're not going to get an accurate measure. And the simplest way to explain this is, and let me turn on my overhead camera because this is a great thing just to draw out. I'll slide this all out of the way, and there's my pencil. And let's say my rocket's gonna launch from right here, and I'm standing right here, and I am a horrible artist, so there's me. And let's say that this is 300 feet, and my rocket goes up and up and up right off the screen. If I'm measuring that, and this angle here gets past 90 degrees, what do you think's happened? This becomes undefined. And the reason for that is this angle here is 90 degrees. And if this angle is 90 degrees, that means both of them are staring straight up, and the sides of a triangle total out at 180 degrees. So if 300 degrees is too close and you hit 90 degrees on your angle, you actually needed to be further back. So you can look at the chart that I had, and I'll put the chart back up. Let's see, there, main screen. Oh, nope, that, and that. So here on this chart, for example, you'll see that it goes out to 400 feet. So the ideal placement for 400 feet is 400 feet in the air. But you can go up to about 9,000 feet in the air. Now, if you look at this chart, this 45-degree angle, the numbers on both sides of it are relatively close to each other, 36 feet on either side of it. And the further you go from it, the larger those numbers get, which indicates you want to keep moving back because you have a larger chance of inaccuracy on your altitude. Yeah, and there I go doing that again. Does that make sense, Melissa? Cool. Okie dokie. So that said, questions on figuring out altitude and everything? Awesome. So that gets us on to our next topic, standard or typical distance. So there is not a standard or typical distance. Basically, if you know your rocket's going to go 1,000 feet, you probably want to be 500 or 600 feet back from it. If your rocket's going to go 200 feet, you could be anywhere from 100 to 200 feet away from it. And I will also say that for the most part, the easiest thing to do is figure out what your pace is. So if your pace or stride is 3 feet, just go with a 3-foot stride. And if you're going to be 300 feet away, count out 100 steps and you'll be 300 feet away. You don't need to get into the precision of measuring it typically, especially when you get into those longer distances. So if you're going to do something like a tree, typically you're going to be in the 30 to 100 feet range if you're going to measure something like a tree or a building. And that'll get you really easily in the accurate ballpark there. So thank you for the question, Julie. So at this point, let's go ahead and talk about choosing rockets. So for county fairs, most counties have adopted the recommended county fair rules that we put out for the state. Melissa, I'm not sure I follow. I just went through that.
No, like, how do you said that you base like how far you stand from it by how high you think it'll go up.
Yep.
How do you guess or whatever how high it'll go?
Awesome question. So I have an answer for you.
Oh, good.
Real easy answer. So in here, and this is the baby Bertha, the package says soars up to 575 feet. So if you know your rocket should go around 575 feet, you can safely assume that, hey, I want to probably be back 400 or so feet from my rocket. And that's going to give you a pretty good shot at getting the right altitude. There are also simulators and stuff that you can go and look up the height of your rocket if you're building a scratch-built rocket. So that's the easy way to get how high your rocket's going to go. Does that help? Awesome. So choosing a rocket for the county fair, like I said, most counties have adopted the recommended rules that the state has provided for county fairs. And with that, do you know of a phone app that'll measure altitude? Yes, you can get a Protractor app that will measure the angle for you. Also, Estes, the company that makes the rockets, has a altitude app that you can get as well. So there are options to do altitude that way, and it works fairly well. From what I have seen with the phone apps, and there's my phone. When you have a phone app, because you're sighting along the edge of your phone, sometimes you get a little off on where it's measuring the angle versus where you're sighting from. So it may be off just a little bit on the angle, and it varies from person to person. Cool. So county fair rules typically now allow for plastic fin units for first and second year foragers under the age of 9. And so an example of that would be something like a generic E2X rocket. This is a kit I use with a lot of youth when building their first rocket. And the intent in this is so that youth can try out the project. It also enables them to get started with all the stuff that they need. So if you go to Hobby Lobby or any of these other locations, they have these starter sets that come with a launch pad, a ready to fly rocket or almost ready to fly rocket with plastic fins. And this gives them the opportunity to go through and build a rocket and try it out and see if it works. So really easy to do this. The judging on these rockets is really simple because, again, the goal is to get youth interested in the event. And I don't know how many people got this in the mail this last week, but this actually ties into the Kansas 4-H Learning Pathway document that just got published. And the idea of this is that 4-H projects are really to be a pathway through the project, not just a, here you're building rockets. So again, the idea with the plastic fins is you start by exploring the project, then you start learning more about the project. And as you go along, you get practice and further experience in that. And Shane, I don't know, is it possible to get this put up in the list of resources?
Yep, so after this is concluded, we will be posting the video, and then all of the links that Tony's been putting in the chat will be posted there as resources so you can find them, and then we can post a link to that as well.
Wonderful. So if the youth is above 9 years old, or if your county has not adopted the state fair recommended rules or has something else entirely, which is also acceptable, my recommended first rocket is a baby Bertha. And this is what the rocket looks like. The most common question about this rocket is, do I have to paint it like it has in the picture? And the answer is no. You can paint it however you want. The two things that are important to note about this rocket and why I recommend it for a first year rocket when you can't have plastic fins is it comes with balsa wood fins. So that's what you see right there. That's that piece of wood. And the fins, if you look at them, extend past the back of the rocket, which makes getting those rocket fins on straight really, really simple. Because you can take it and literally set it on the edge of a table, or use a book or anything else to get your fins square when you go and install them, as opposed to trying to get it on straight when you don't have anything there to support the fin. So this is an awesome first year rocket to get started with. Probably one of the easier ones to build for Foragers. And this one was $7.99. So it's not a huge investment to go and do. So that's what I recommend for ages all the way up till about 12 for your first year. The older you get, the more advanced the expectations are in your rocket building. And so after about the age of 12, your first year rocket should probably be a little bit more complex. And the reasoning behind that is you're able to read the rules and everything by yourself, and should be able to see, hey, I need to have smooth paint. I need to have a little bit more complexity in the rocket that I build. And so this is adapting to the ages and stages there. And most judges should understand, and this is why we ask it on the form, how many years have you been displaying rockets at your county fair? If it's your first year, we're not going to expect the world. If it is your 12th year displaying rockets at the county fair, doing something simple like the rocket that I just showed you isn't something that we would expect. So that is my recommendation on rockets for the first year. After you've gotten the hang of it and you are 9 years old or older, we expect balsa or cardboard based fins. If you're doing something really fancy and you have fiberglass fins, you can use fiberglass fins as well. So with that, let's open this up for questions.
And again, feel free if you want to put those in the chat, or you are welcome to unmute and turn your video on, or just unmute.
Do the extension offices for certain counties, do they still have like rocket kits that you can get from there? Because it seems like when I was in 4-H, I remember you could get them from the extension office.
So to my knowledge, counties don't generally have rocket kits. Some may that you can get, but most don't. So back in 2000-ish timeframe, it would have been 98 to 2000. The state extension agent at the time had a very close relationship with Estes Industries and was able to get the state several thousand rockets. And so I know that those went out to several counties to do rocket launches and stuff with. So that may have been where those had come from. And since that time, the relationship with Estes Industries has declined a little bit, and we don't have ready access to thousands of rockets anymore. Okay, so
Hi,
top
Tony.
three, yes,
I had a 17-year-old that brought a level 2 rocket to the fair.
to
And
the
he had
county
been
fair.
in rocketry a number of years.
Mm-hmm.
And he thought he should get a higher ribbon than I gave him because he had been the project leader. My thinking was, great, you did your leadership, but dropping to a level 2 rocket for you did not challenge your skills to the level that you should be challenged or doing, and should
It-
not be competing at that level against younger 4-Hers.
So
What do you think?
you're spot on with your analysis. The one thing I will add to that is they're not necessarily competing, but it's not exhibiting their skill. And I'm going to change my screenshot so that y'all see my smiling face instead of the overhead camera. There we go. So they're not necessarily competing against the younger 4-Hers, but they are not exhibiting their maximum potential. And you are spot on with that analysis. That is something I would tell the 4-Her as well. You've been doing this for how many ever years? I can understand being busy and going back towards an easier rocket to do. However, that's not exhibiting your abilities. If you want to showcase both your abilities and your leadership, instead of doing a rocket, do a educational notebook presentation or some other opportunity. And we have several different areas in the Rocketry project itself that talks about how you help younger members with their rocketry project and go through the steps with an easier rocket. That's how you do that if you want to do an easier rocket. Otherwise, I'd expect a harder rocket. Does that help?
Well, that was my analysis, but I wanted,
Yep.
another opinion to see, because I thought, well, if I'm wrong, I don't want to
Nope, you're spot on.
talk to this. And that's how I talk to the 4-Her, but I want to talk to them that way and make sure that I'm in line with other people, other judges.
Yep, that is exactly how you want to do it. Lacey has a question
Thank
in the
you.
chat. More than welcome. So top 3 resources to send to parents that live in a county without project leaders in STEM. So I actually have one, because every time I find new resources, I'm putting those resources up on it. And that is stem4ks.com. So stem4ks.com is where you can go. And this is a privately run website that basically the action team runs / I run in cooperation with Kansas 4-H, where we put all of the judging sheets, where we put resources, where we put all sorts of stuff. And Shane and I try and mirror content between the two. So the other site is the Kansas 4-H website. And we try and mirror our content so that all of the content shows up on both. But that is where to go to get the content that you might be interested in, be it robotics, be it rocketry, be it computers, or anything else. Okay, and then Aaron has a question in here. What about scale models that use plastic fins or clear plastic fins for stability during flight? Are those acceptable for experienced 4-Hers? So I know the model you're talking about. I actually have it off camera in my other room, waiting for me to build, Aaron. So it's a very touchy area. And the way most judges come down on it is plastic fins are plastic fins are plastic fins. You don't have to do any alignment to them, so they shouldn't count. Now, my answer on that is it's going to be a ribbon deduction if they're there and part of the exhibit. However, if the fins aren't there, then it's not part of the exhibit and it's not being judged on that. So that is one of those loopholes and gray areas where, yes, it has plastic fins, but because it's not part of the display, it's not necessarily judged on it. Judge may say something about, hey, you forgot these, in which case I'd say, no, I didn't. I don't want to be judged on them. But most of the time, if you just leave them out of the display and display it like it's meant to be displayed, you're not going to run into problems with the judges. So that's my gray area explanation of that, is they're required for launch, they're not required for display, or at least in most cases. Some of them are required. Now, there are also some Saturn V rockets that Estes has put out recently that do have plastic fins, but those plastic fins don't mount through the wall. You have to do alignment and everything on them. And those are acceptable because those are seen more as accessories on the side of the rocket, just like you'll see little plastic nozzles and little plastic wraparound material on that. But actual guiding fins that slide into the bottom of the rocket, when those are plastic, leave them out. So hopefully that helps answer that question. And sorry for the phone call. Which HPR organizations do you recommend for older foragers looking to get into high power, Gnar or Tripoli? So great question, Aaron. My recommendation is either Gnar or Tripoli, with the realization that Kansas 4-H follows Gnar guidelines. So National Association of Rocketry guidelines are followed. So that means if you're doing a Tripoli launch, Tripoli may allow you to fly on larger engines than Gnar does, and that's fine. However, for fair rules and stuff, you want to make sure you stay below those when you're doing your report and everything. You want to stay in that Gnar area. And cool. Oh, one thing I will add on the Gnar versus Tripoli, as long as you're following Gnar safety guidelines, if you're a Tripoli member, that's fine. You don't have to be a member of both. You can go do Tripoli launches and everything else. Just stay within the realms of the Gnar rules at the launches if you're going to be reporting those for a Kansas 4-H event. Cool. Do we have other questions? I know we've gone just a touch longer than intended, but I'm more than happy to stay on to answer other questions.
All right, as you guys are thinking of questions you might want to ask, I just shared my screen. And since we had about 16 people stay till the end, I'm just going to order a few extra copies of the curriculum. This is a really good resource if you're doing activities with your club members. It's the Rockets Away from Ohio State made this a few years back, but it talks about exploring the science of forces in motion. Lots of good tangible things that hopefully you guys can use as club leaders. So after this, we'll be mailing that directly to you. That's why I asked for your address when you guys signed up for this. So hopefully I have everyone. I think it's Heather Ross. I hope I saw Ross from the right place, and I think that's the right person, but we'll be mailing those out. And then a reminder, this is a series. So this is our second session. We still have lots of good ones going on. Our next one will be really great. I have one of the authors of the STEAM clothing curriculum that is going to come talk to us. That's a really great one that I'm hoping more people will start to use as they're teaching textile science. All right, we probably have time maybe for one more question if anyone has them, and then we'll probably let Tony go.
Awesome. So there was an additional question from Aaron in the chat, and Aaron was asking whether electronic altimeters are acceptable or if judges prefer the protractor method. And the answer is either one is acceptable. They want to see that youth are applying what they've learned to determine how high their rocket went. An altimeter is one way to determine how high your rocket went. A protractor is another way. If you want to get really creative, there are plenty of ways to figure out how high your rocket went. For example, you can use a computer simulator to determine how high your rocket went. RockSim will let you put in the weight of your rocket and all sorts of other pieces of information about your rocket fin configuration, length, and a bunch of other stuff. And it'll tell you that on a given engine, your rocket went X number of feet high. That is an acceptable way. The goal is to learn about how your rocket performs and how high it went. It's not about going, you have to do it this one way. It's about exploring. So it gets back to that pathways thing. There are real simple ways to do it, and there are real complex ways to do it. So it's entirely up to the youth how they figure out how high it went. The only thing that we don't want to see is an estimation. I estimated that my rocket went, because an estimation isn't using any sort of scientific method. So you're not, if somebody sits there and goes, well, that rocket went 3 telephone poles high and those telephone poles are 30 feet. That's an estimation method. There's no scientific logic with that. So hopefully that helps with your answer, Aaron.
All right, we are right about at the hour. Thank you guys so much for taking part, and thank you, Tony. Hopefully now you guys have seen Tony, and the next time we're at the state fair or somewhere, you have a connection with a great resource we have in the state. Right, hopefully we'll see you all on Tuesday or one of the other sessions. Thanks, everyone.